The first question to you, take us through what happened on this House vote and what comes next.
Right. So this was the first step in what is going to be a very long process to pass every single element of Donald Trump's agenda, from border security to defense spending to energy policy, and of course the signature element of this, which is extending the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the signature Trump tax cuts bill, if you will. The Senate passed a different budget resolution last week that only targets the non-tax elements of this. And this is important because the House and Senate ultimately have to pass the same budget resolution in order for all of this to move forward. Now, the House's budget resolution does not allow for the 2017 Trump-era tax cuts to be made permanent. That is a key demand of Senate Republican leadership, especially Majority Leader John Thune and Majority Whip John Barrasso. So that is one of the key differences between these two pieces of legislation. They're going to have to reconcile them at some point. And then after that, they're going to have to get down into the details of what's called reconciliation instructions. I know this is all very wonky and procedural, but it's very important. And it's going to take several months to ultimately get this done if they can actually get the votes for this. Again, I want to stress this was simply a first step.
David, this used to be your jam. What's your reaction to what we saw on the Hill tonight?
So I think we should assume, based on historic precedent, that when a Republican controls the White House, the Senate, and the House, everything will kind of get done. And I think that's the case. I think this kind of foretells that President Trump's agenda is actually going to get through the Congress. I think the most important thing is, from my personal experience, the math never actually adds up. Ever, ever, ever. And so earlier today, there were 4 to 14 holdouts. They all fell in line except for one. The bottom line is nobody cares. Everybody looks the other way at debt and deficits and all that other stuff. This will allow Republicans to pass border control. They will pass an extension of the Trump tax cuts. It'll either be permanent or not. They'll say it's paid for, but it's not. It ultimately is going to increase the national debt, and Republicans will figure out a way to say that it didn't.
Okay, so let's say we even take debt and deficit off the table, because at the end of the day, people talk about it, but when it comes down to it, it doesn't matter. If this thing goes through, we're going to enact trillions in tax cuts that are going to be funded in part by cutting Medicaid. Is that going to be? I mean, I can't imagine. You know, yes, they'll get it through, but who's that popular for?
So I think to Andrew's point, today was a procedural vote, and they'll still have another procedural vote. But at some point, they're going to have a very substantive vote. And so call it the Republican Medicaid caucus. Is that 10 members in swing districts that expressed concerns? Obviously, today it wasn't a big enough concern for them. I do think what this all sets up, Stephanie, so elections have consequences. Republicans will pass their agenda this session. I really think they will, as much as Democrats try to protest. But I think that the issues of economic disparity, the wealth gap, money in politics, the corruption of billionaires in politics becomes an overwhelming issue in the midterms for Democrats to grab onto, because that is a theme of the current Trump-Musk administration.
It's also the root of what Donald Trump originally ran on.
Sure, but look... Right? I mean, you can go to the blue collar or farm worker in Iowa who says, I voted for Donald Trump because he's like me. It's part of the mystique of
Remember
Donald
Drain
Trump.
the Swamp?
Yeah, right, Drain the Swamp. But what Donald Trump is doing is, I think the net worth of Elon Musk has increased more than the entire budget of USAID since the election, right? And so there's a fiction to all of this. But I do think the American people see this. They see the corruption of money in politics, and the thread is from the wealth gap to corruption and grift and graft. Democrats will find their footing on this. I do think the election of last November has consequences, and as much as Democrats will resist, Republicans showed us tonight they're going to pass Donald Trump's agenda.
All right, new topic. Jeff, obviously there is still a lot we do not know about this potential minerals deal with Ukraine. How does it change the relationship between our two countries? And what exactly, I know, again, we only have a limited amount of information. At this point, what does it seem like Ukraine's getting, and what are we getting?
All good questions. I would start by answering sort of the politics of this. If it ends up being what it looks like, it would be a victory for President Trump in terms of getting something in return for the U.S. aid and the money and arms that have gone to helping Ukraine in the war with Russia. And that's been really important to him. So if there ends up being a deal that the two of them can sign, and by the two of them I mean President Trump and President Zelensky, that will probably strengthen a relationship that has been a little fraught, to say the least, over the last week, with both men sort of trading barbs about the other. In terms of the actual details, what the initial reporting shows is that there will be a fund of some kind that the Ukrainians will pay into, that the United States will get a benefit from, up to $500 billion, and that will be seen as sort of a payback for what the United States has already invested into Ukrainian defense. You also asked, what does Ukraine get out of it? That's a question that I think we're going to have to keep asking, because what Ukraine wants is some kind of security guarantees. You did hear the president saying today that it might be necessary to have a peacekeeping force of some kind in Ukraine in order for a peace to be continued, or a peace to stay after a peace deal is created. That's something that the Kremlin doesn't want, that President Putin of Russia doesn't want. So we'll see if that ends up happening. But the Ukrainians and the Ukrainian leadership want security guarantees of some kind. And perhaps just having the United States have an interest in Ukrainian minerals will be a step towards that.
David, it seems like Zelensky was feeling the pressure here. If this happens, will this be a big win for President Trump with the American people?
No, I don't think so. I think this landed like a thud with Republicans of all walks of life.
Tell us why.
Because they actually know there's no way to get to Donald Trump's position that Vladimir Putin is anything but a dictator. So you can say we're spending too much money on Ukraine, but to suggest that Zelensky's a dictator and Vladimir Putin isn't landed like a thud in Republican politics. Now, what can he do? I mean, the truth is, Ukraine was only competitive in the war against Russia because of the aid from the United States and Europe. I mean, despite all their valor, their commitment, the loss of life, the remarkable, honorable leadership of Ukrainians, they relied on the United States. Donald Trump abandoned them. He surrendered. And he surrendered, and so did Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth and Mike Waltz. They surrendered to Vladimir Putin, and you saw the likes of Macron in Europe say, holy you know what? Yeah, holy cow.
Smokes.
Like, what just changed in the United States? And even Republicans are sharing the European viewpoint on this. But if you're Zelensky, you can't do anything else. Donald Trump just put him over a barrel, and it's a shameful moment in American history.
Okay.
But it's a lot of people, Steph, will see this as unpatriotic and question what do the Russians have on Donald Trump, whether or not they do or not. We know factually he sides with Russia. A lot of Americans will be asking why.
A lot of informed people will.
That's right.
But think about all sorts of other people that Donald Trump is going to say, look, we're spending an unlimited amount of money in Ukraine, getting nothing back, and I fought and got something. I strong-armed my way to get it.
For the last 70 to 80 years, peace in the West and the strength of the Western alliance has been centered around protecting the West from Russian aggression. And that goes back to 6 months ago. And Donald Trump just said that's no longer the foreign policy of the United States. Russia is an aggressor. They're not our ally. They're our adversary. We should ally with Europe. We should ally with Ukraine. And Donald Trump said, we're not going to do that anymore. This is a major shift that empowers an enemy, not an ally.
New topic. Andrew, it feels like Republicans on the Hill are starting to gently speak up about the DOGE cuts. Watch this.
I think they need to be more targeted and they need to be more thoughtful. I think, President Trump has appointed some really wonderful people to lead his agencies. And these secretaries of the various departments should be looking at the agency, seeing where efficiencies can be made, seeing where there's too much overhead.
Just a little bit of humanity and dignity to the process, I think, is what many of the Alaskan federal employees are asking for, and I don't think that that's asking for too much. There is a way to do this that is proper, that is lawful, and also treats our federal employees with a little bit of dignity.
I think that any process you undergo where you're trying to find efficiencies And if that involves some reductions in force, it needs to be done in a respectful way. Obviously, that's respectful of people involved. But I do think as they go through this process, the objective of DOGE is to try and figure out ways to make government run more efficiently.
And that objective is a good one, Andrew. It seems like their problem isn't with the goals of DOGE, but how they're doing it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I would add to that Senator Thom Tillis, Republican of North Carolina, by the way, up for re-election in 2026. So he's got a political interest in weighing in on all of this. He compared this to really, he said it's like a customer service problem, right? Citizens of the United States expect government services for them, things like veterans benefits, things like Social Security Administration, things like national parks being open and operating, right? When that stuff starts to get cut and Americans start to feel that, at a certain point, even if they voted for Donald Trump, they're questioning, hey, why is this happening, right? And that's why you're seeing so many Republicans, particularly in these town halls from over the last week or so, really starting to feel that from their constituents, many of whom, again, voted for Donald Trump, but are thinking to themselves, wait, I didn't vote for this. I didn't want these types of essential services to be cut. And that's even apart from the whole argument that you heard from John Thune and Lisa Murkowski, for example, on the idea of doing this in a very sort of compassionate way. So that is something that we're going to continue to hear, I think, from Republicans, especially those like Thom Tillis and others who are up for re-election in 2026 and are going to be facing the voters sooner than anyone else.